Thank you for joining for this QWebinar of QWorld today. We have the pleasure to listen to a talk by Sumeet Khatri, who will talk about the quantum internet. So my name is Zoltán Zimborás. I will be the moderator together with Krista Pettersson. We are both active member of QWorld. Krista is a member of Q Latvia and I'm a member of Q Hungary. And the organizers of this QWebinar were Abu, that is Abuzer Yakari Yilmaz, who is basically the leader of QWorld, and Agnieszka Wolska. So before I introduce more formally Sumeet, let me tell you a few things about the code of conducts and the protocols of our QWebinars. So as all activities of QWorld, this is also dedicated to providing harassment-free experience for everyone. So please note this. And also please do not record this or broadcast this meeting. And a recorded video will be available on our YouTube channel. And each registered person will be informed about it. And we have already collected a couple of questions to Sumeet, but you can still ask questions, so please communicate with us and ask your questions in the comment section as comments. So don't you should not unmute yourself during the talk, and at the end of the talk, we, as moderators, we collect the questions and then ask them. I mean, Krista will lead that session. So let me now formally introduce our speaker, Sumeet. Oh, sorry, before that, before I introduce, I should also make some advertisement for QWorld, and in particular for the Q research department, which both Krista and I am part of. QWorld is doing both outreach activities concerning quantum information science, mostly quantum computing, but also quantum communications presently. But we also are doing research activities, and we encourage quantum researchers and enthusiasts to share their knowledge and expertise of the most on the most current results in quantum technologies, and in particular quantum computing and quantum communication. And Q research is actually the part of QWorld which aims to popularize these type of really recent results. And we are running different research project programs, and we already conducted one Q internship program, the Q intern program. So it was very successful, and this summer we will again do. And like during the year, I mean, this is in summer, we do these study groups on very particular topics. And actually Sumeet is helping us in one of these topics. So please, after the talk, if you want, you can also talk about us if you want to join. So we hope that we will help to create the next quantum revolution. And now I can really go on and introduce formally our speaker, Sumeet. He's a recent PhD graduate from Louisiana State University. He has worked on various aspects of quantum information, communication, and computation. And despite his young age, he's actually already written a book, or he's a co-author of a new textbook called Principles of Quantum Communication Theory, a Modern Approach. By the way, you can find an earlier and not full version of this on arXiv. And before starting his PhD, Sumeet earned his undergraduate and master's degrees at the University of Waterloo, which is a huge center for quantum information science and quantum computing. Okay, thanks. And the title of today's lecture is The Quantum Internet: Prospects, Progress, and Challenges. Sumeet, I will stop sharing. Please share your screen.
All right. Right, can you see it?
Yes, perfectly, thank you.
All right, so thank you, Zoltan, for that wonderful introduction, and thanks to everyone for being here. I'm really excited to present at this QWorld, and I should say before starting that this is a very nice initiative that has been put forward. I think it's very nice that there's this global collaboration of people working on quantum information science in general, and I'm really glad to be part of this initiative. It's really nice. So the title of my talk is The Quantum Internet, Prospects, Progress, and Challenges. So there are 3 parts there, but before I even begin, let me first unpack this term, quantum internet. So what exactly does that mean? So let me start by just talking to you about the internet itself. So what we have right now. So when we talk about internet, we mean an interconnected network of networks. So here what I've shown is a sort of visual depiction of what the internet was like in 2003. So here we have nodes and we have lines connecting these nodes, and the different colors of the nodes represent different regions of the world. And the nodes themselves, you can think of them as being computers. So computers or servers, something like what you're viewing this talk on right now. And the connections would be physical connections like fiber connections and so on. And when we talk about the quantum internet, what we want is something pretty much the same thing as this. So the grand vision is to have, instead of our classical computers, to have quantum computers connected to this kind of network. And the links would, instead of usual classical links that we have right now, they would be quantum links. So this is something that I will talk a little bit more about. But because an internet is just different sort of interconnected network of networks, what we really need to focus on initially from the quantum side is just on small scale networks. So this is maybe an artist's depiction of what a quantum network would look like, where the individual nodes would be quantum devices, so devices capable of processing quantum information. So not even necessarily quantum computers right away, but just small scale quantum devices. And these connections, these links would be links that are capable of transmitting this quantum information between different nodes. And that would allow you to execute quantum communication tasks. So when we talk about quantum networking, this involves the quantum aspects at the nodes and as well as the communication. But because we are in a network, we also borrow ideas from classical networking theory. So in that sense, we can think of quantum networking or the quantum internet more generally as being the combination of quantum communication and computing on one hand, and ideas from classical networking on the other hand. So one of the things that you wonder about immediately is, how is this different from the usual internet, and what is it that we can do in such a quantum internet, right? So here on the right-hand side, I'm showing a nice figure from this paper in Science about the various stages of quantum networks, and based on each stage, what functionalities we can achieve. So I won't be talking about all of these functionalities in this talk for the sake of time, but really what I'll stick to is these sort of point-to-point communication tasks, things that are actually within reach today or in the near future, such as teleportation. So I'll talk about what that means, and also quantum key distribution, which I'll also talk about. There's also the application of distributed quantum computation, which is more sort of into the future. So this would be the kind of thing that we could execute when we get to the sort of top level of this stack. So in this region of fault-tolerant quantum computing, basically. So this is something that I won't really talk too much about, but this is something that is part of the vision of a quantum internet. It's really the kind of internet we have today, where we have different quantum computers linked to each other so that we can do various tasks that are not possible using the classical internet. And some of these tasks are here on the side. What I will talk about is mostly these point-to-point communication tasks, and those can be achieved using stages that are near the bottom. So trusted repeater networks, prepare and measure, and entanglement generation, leading up slowly towards this quantum memory stage. And so these are the kinds of things that we can do in a quantum network, but it's also important for us to be very clear about what we cannot do. So, sort of dispel any rumors or any misconception that might exist. So what can't we do? So we can't do faster than light communication. So that's something that is already ruled out by the laws of quantum mechanics itself. So maybe you have heard this type of thing in the media, but no, you can't do it. So maybe I just say that right off the bat. And what will also be clear, I hope, by the end of my talk is that the quantum internet will not replace the internet that we currently have. In fact, many of the tasks that we want to do in a quantum internet will require classical links, and therefore the classical internet will still be needed in a quantum internet. So it will not completely replace what we currently have, but it will be something that will augment the capabilities and the functionalities that currently exist. All right. So that's like a brief sort of quick thing to start off with. But for the rest of my talk, I will split it up into 5 parts. So first, I will go through some of the background of quantum mechanics and some of the technical aspects. Then I will go through the 3 sort of parts of the talk. So the prospects, the progress, and the challenges of a quantum internet. And then at the end, I will provide some outlook on research directions and more places that you can go to learn about quantum networks. All right. So let's start with the first part, which is just the background. So I'll start right from the top about quantum mechanics. So quantum mechanics, we can think about in short as the study of matter on small scales. So already around early 1900s, people started to realize that a lot of matter on small scales, such as atoms and photons and so on, behave differently than what the predictions of classical mechanics were telling them. So, and there are many people involved in these initial discoveries, but some of the foundational discoveries were made by the individuals that I've shown here. So Planck, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Einstein, Born. A lot of these people were involved, and many others, in some of the foundational discoveries that led to quantum mechanics and quantum information that we know about today. And a lot of them also contributed very heavily to the mathematical formalism and the sort of theoretical framework that we currently use to do calculations. So things like discrete energies, uncertainty relation, the Schrödinger equation, which many of you might have already seen. All of these were known in the early 1900s. And as these developments were happening, people were also thinking about the more formal mathematical aspects and sort of having a nice framework in which to do calculations and to think mathematically about quantum mechanics. And I can mention 3 people who are sort of involved in this kind of effort. And they really helped to shape the way we do quantum mechanics today. So at some point in the early 1900s, we started to have this theoretical formulation of quantum mechanics, sort of abstract notion. And around the same time, we also started to think about quantum systems, such as atoms and photons, as carriers of information, right? So here we not only think about quantum mechanics as the theory of describing how the world works, how matter and so on works, but now we think about them as being able to carry information and therefore being able to use quantum systems to communicate. So this is the first sort of initial thoughts behind quantum communication. So on the left-hand side here, we have basically just the classical bit, right? So as you probably already know, classical bits can only take on 2 values, either 0 or 1, or in some sense, they can be a probabilistic mixture. So it's some probability it is 0, or it's some probability it's 1. And we can model that using this blue line here. But in the quantum case, it turns out that not only can we have these 2 values, 0 and 1, these 2 distinct values, but we can also have what's called a superposition. So here I'd write mathematically a general superposition state. And what this basically means as a diagram is that the state of a qubit, which is the quantum bit, can lie on the surface of a sphere instead of just 2 points and a line in the middle. Okay. And this allows us to view quantum systems in a more abstract way. So now at this point, we no longer think about the physical system that is encoding our qubit, but we just think that it is a qubit and that we can describe it using a Hilbert space. So here I write a Hilbert space, which is we can think of as a complex vector space with an inner product, right? And along these lines of the information theoretic perspective, when we talk about a physical evolution of quantum systems, instead of thinking directly through the Schrodinger equation, which I showed before, we just think about it in terms of what's called a quantum channel, right? So I will not go through the idea what a quantum channel is in a lot of detail here, but just to say that this is the kind of abstract view that we take when we talk about quantum communication, and this is important when we start talking about the quantum internet and quantum networks. Okay. So now in this information theoretic point of view, some of the initial results that are important for us were this thing called the no cloning theorem. Okay, so this is the idea that there does not exist any operation that you can use to copy an arbitrary quantum state. So as opposed to what we can do in the classical case, we can very easily copy classical bits. In the quantum case, this is not possible. And these were the sort of three foundational papers that proposed or proved this theorem, essentially. And this has ultimately to do with the linearity of quantum mechanics, which we can already see in the Schrodinger equation itself. Okay. Another important aspect that came about slightly before this even was what's called now Bell's theorem. So John Bell, who was a scientist, realized that correlations in quantum mechanics do not correspond to local hidden variable models. And this was a direct response to Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, who were thinking about entanglement and wondering whether the theory of quantum mechanics that had been developed was complete, in the sense that was it possible to think about quantum mechanics in a statistical mechanical way as arising due to some kind of hidden variable model. And this paper of Bell actually disproves this idea and shows that correlations in quantum mechanics can be very different, and they can correspond to something that doesn't represent this kind of local hidden variable model. And this is where we really start to understand entanglement in a really strict and very formal sense. And so entanglement ends up also being very useful or very important in the quantum internet and in quantum networks. And so now I will talk about entanglement. So entanglement initially just concerns two parties. So here we have Alice and Bob, and let's say that each of them holds some quantum system. So here I'm just drawing them generically as some kind of atom, right? So they each have some atom. You can think of it just as a qubit. So now what are the kinds of quantum states that Alice and Bob can prepare their systems with, right? So I'll discuss three generic types. So the first is what we would call a product state, right? So if you want to describe the qubits of Alice and Bob together, one possibility is that Alice and Bob individually prepare their qubits, right? So Alice prepares her system in some state sigma, and Bob prepares his system in some state tau, right? And we would describe this using the tensor product. And so we would say that the joint system is in some sense uncorrelated, right? So the joint state can be just described by looking at the individual qubits themselves. So the next level up from this is what we would call a separable state. So here's where we start to get some kind of correlation between Alice and Bob. So, but this is a kind of correlation that corresponds to Alice and Bob. They individually prepare their systems and they correlate their preparations through classical communication with some probability distribution. Right? So here P represents some probability distribution, and they decide through communication based on the outcomes of this random sampling from this distribution, how they're going to prepare their systems. Okay? And this they can do through classical communication. So when I draw these lines, they represent classical communication. So in some sense now, this state is correlated, but it's kind of a classical correlation. So it's not really quantum mechanical in some sense, even though the systems that are storing these correlations are quantum. The correlations themselves are still can be argued are classical. But now we go one next level up and we get to what is called an entangled state. So an entangled state is anything that you cannot write in this form that I'm showing here on the right-hand side. So it is something that does not correspond to simply just being local preparations assisted with classical communication, right? So in particular, what this means is that the correlations between Alice and Bob are non-local. And in particular, the state of the individual systems is not sufficient to describe the pair as a whole. Okay? And it is this important aspect that exists in quantum mechanics that allows us to do many of the things that we can't do classically, right? So important examples of entangled quantum states are what are called Bell states. And they are named precisely after John Bell, who was the person that I talked about earlier with regards to Bell's theorem. Right? So these are four states of 2 qubits. And the important thing here is that if you were to look mathematically at the individual states of Alice and Bob, they would be locally random. So if you were, for any one of these states, if you were to just look at the state of Alice or the state of Bob, it would be totally random. But if you do joint measurements on the states, or both Alice and Bob do measurements in some kind of configuration basis, then their results would be correlated in specific ways. And this is the kind of thing that entanglement is about. And it allows us to do many of the things that we can't do. And some of these things I will talk about. All right. So I've shown 2 things now. So one of the things is entanglement, which I've just described here, and superposition itself. So all 4 of these states are superposition states. And once people started to realize this new area of science started to emerge called quantum information science. So people started to wonder, can we use this physical phenomena of entanglement and superposition to do things faster or better? Right? So this is where the idea that we could use a quantum computer, so a computer that makes use of these entanglement and superposition to do things like factoring large numbers, or to simulate quantum systems itself. So these were some of the initial applications of quantum computers that people were thinking about and started doing. But of course, now we also want to know whether or not we can do new things. So some of the new things that we can do that we can't do classically are things like teleportation and quantum key distribution. Right? So this whole area of quantum information science is now really broadened over the past 20 to 30 years. And people do a variety of different things now. So we have quantum communication, which is what I'll be talking mostly about. There's quantum computing, which itself has many different things. Quantum metrology and quantum sensing. And the quantum information science can also, the information theoretic perspective is also helpful to think about the foundations of quantum mechanics itself. So this theorem of Bell that I talked about earlier falls into this idea, or into this area of quantum foundations. And people still, even now, look at various different ways of probing what exactly makes quantum mechanics quantum, what are the limits of quantum mechanics, and so on. All right. So in this talk, I will focus mostly on quantum communication and how that could be used in a quantum network. So let me now talk a little bit more about what quantum communication actually is, right? So broadly speaking, we can define quantum communication as using quantum systems and quantum strategies to send qubits, but also even classical bits. So we might actually think about whether we can use quantum mechanics to send classical bits better or faster than we can do using regular classical channels, right? So one basic way of thinking about this is Alice, who holds a qubit in her lab, wants to send it to Bob, right? So she can send that through what we would call an ideal quantum channel to Bob, such that when she sends it through that channel, it will arrive to Bob perfectly. So, and when I say perfect, I mean that the state that Alice prepared her qubit in arrives perfectly to Bob when he receives it. Okay. So this is what we would call an ideal quantum channel. But as you might guess already, ideal quantum channels don't really exist in the real world. So what we instead have are noisy quantum channels. So there's a noisy quantum channel, and this kind of quantum channel is a mathematical object that models the imperfections in the transmission medium. So this transmission medium could be just a fiber optic cable, or it could be just a free space or an atmospheric link. So it could be like a flying qubit as well. Okay. And what this basically means is that the noise in the transmission medium disturbs the quantum state that Alice initially prepared her qubit in, such that when she sends it to Bob, the state that Bob gets is going to be different from the one that Alice initially intended. And this has important consequences for communication, because it means that the communication is in some sense distorted and it has to be corrected. And how people correct this kind of information distortion is something that I will talk closer to the end of this lecture about. Okay. So this is the basic task of quantum communication that you can think about. And one specific way of achieving this ideal quantum channel in particular is through this protocol called teleportation. So here's the sort of circuit diagram to describe teleportation. And contrary to what you might have seen in the media, it does not involve any kind of physical transmission, or it's not something that you might think about from sci-fi movies. What quantum teleportation really is what I've shown here on this slide. So it is a protocol that Alice can use to send an arbitrary qubit to Bob using a shared entangled state along with classical communication. So here on the left-hand side, Alice has a qubit, which I'm denoting by psi, that she wants to send to Bob. Right? And the other important thing here is that Alice and Bob both share an entangled state beforehand. Right? And so this is the state that I'm indicating here with the phi plus state. Right? So the protocol proceeds by Alice doing a measurement of the qubit that she wants to send and the qubit that she shares with Bob through the maximally entangled state. So she measures those qubits, and she gets 2 classical bits as outcomes of that measurement. And she sends those classical outcomes to Bob. So this is where the classical communication part comes in, right? So these classical outcomes need to be communicated to Bob. And based on the outcome of that measurement, Bob will do some kind of correction operation on his qubit in order to recover, finally, at the end, the qubit that Alice intended to send. Okay. So this is a protocol that doesn't involve any transmission of quantum systems explicitly. The only things that are required are, of course, the entangled state to be shared along with classical communication. So you might ask, how do Alice and Bob share this entangled state in the first place? And this is something that I will get to later on in this talk. All right. So this is one kind of protocol to do quantum communication. There's another foundational quantum communication protocol called Superdense Coding. And this is a protocol that is used to do classical communication with the assistance of entanglement and a perfect quantum channel. Okay. So I'll go through this one briefly. So Alice intends to send 2 classical bits to Bob. And she shares, as before, an entangled quantum state with Bob. Okay. So here's that entangled state again, the phi plus state. Okay. And it's very similar to teleportation in that Alice will encode the classical bits she wants to send into her qubit. So she will do some gates on her qubit based on the values of the classical bits she wants to send. Then she will send her qubit over an ideal quantum channel to Bob. And once Bob gets that qubit, he will do a measurement. It will be the same kind of Bell measurement that I described on the previous slide. And in the ideal case, what will happen is that the outcome of this Bell measurement will precisely give Bob the bits that Alice wished to send. Okay. So this is interesting because it allows for Alice to send 2 classical bits to Bob, making use of only one use of an ideal quantum channel along with a shared entangled state. Okay. So this is a protocol to do classical communication. I've also talked about protocol, which was a teleportation protocol to do quantum communication. So a third type of communication that we have is what's called private communication. So this is a kind of communication between Alice and Bob that should be kept secret from any outside influence or some kind of eavesdropper, right? So this is what we call quantum key distribution. So here I'm going to describe what is called an entanglement-based version of quantum key distribution, in which we have a source. So the source will distribute some kind of entangled state to Alice and Bob. And then Alice and Bob will do successive measurements on many copies of these entangled states. And those measurements will lead to classical values on either side. Okay? And those classical values, Alice and Bob can then use that along with classical communication to share a secret key. So in the ideal case, this key will be secret in the sense that no other eavesdropper outside has knowledge of what it is. Okay. And then they can use that secret key that they share as part of any kind of encryption scheme to do communication. Okay. So let me describe a little bit more in detail about what this means. So this is entanglement-based QKD in the sense that it makes use of entangled states. And the key point here is that the source is untrusted. So when I draw the source here in the middle, it does not necessarily mean that the source is physically located in between Alice and Bob. Actually, the source itself could be belonging to Alice or to Bob, but the point is that it is untrusted. So in some sense, we imagine that it belongs to an eavesdropper. So we might assume that the source, which is some black box in general, could be made by some company that maybe we don't trust, or we might believe has, in some sense, hacked into the device. So we don't want to trust the source, or we don't want to assume anything about it. And in some sense, you could say the same thing about the measurement devices itself. And that's something people do as well. And as I mentioned before, the measurement statistics that Alice and Bob get, so when they do their measurements and they get their classical bits, they can share information about those classical bits through an authenticated classical channel, and they can use that to estimate the amount of entanglement that's in their quantum state, or in the quantum state of the source. And they can decide, based on the amount of entanglement that they see, whether or not to abort the protocol. So this is one of the unique things about quantum mechanics, which is that if the source has been tampered with in any way, it can be detected, right? And so this is also one of the things that leads to what's called information theoretic security. So this kind of thing is important because many of the encryption schemes that we rely on today do not satisfy this property. So most of them are what are known as computationally secure, in the sense that breaking them is believed to be very hard to do computationally. But having something that is information theoretic is very important because of Shor's algorithm, which is a quantum algorithm for factoring large numbers, which in principle could break this RSA encryption scheme that is very widely used. So it is important to have this quantum key distribution protocol such that at some point we can use this and be safe even against quantum computers when they eventually become widely available and large scale. Okay. So now I've discussed basically the background and the kinds of communication tasks that we would want to do in a quantum network. So now in the second part, let me talk about how we can take what I've talked about here, these communication protocols, and how we might do this in a quantum internet. Okay. And what are the other things that we might be able to do? All right. So the basic idea now is to go from this point to point. So instead of just having Alice and Bob as our senders and receivers in the network, we have multiple, right? So now we might have a situation where we want to communicate between a node in a network that isn't directly connected via one of the quantum channels to another node, right? So this is where ideas from networking start to come into play. So some of the tasks that we might want to do are, for example, these communication tasks that I just talked about, such as teleportation, superdense coding, and QKD. And we might want to do this between an arbitrary set of nodes. But now one of the nice things about a network is that we have multiple parties. And so we get into this regime where we can start doing multi-party protocols. So not just protocols between two individuals, but between multiple individuals. So there are things like conference key agreement, secret sharing. These are all very interesting applications. But for the purpose of, for the sake of time, I won't go through all of these. But now once we start to get into these applications, we run into other issues which are more related to the networking aspect that I talked about at the very beginning. So this is where ideas from classical networking start to come in, such as routing. So we might want to, we're concerned about trying to find paths between given nodes in a network. And we also have to start thinking about things like resource allocation and so on. So these are the types of things that start to come up. And one important thing is, so here on the right-hand side, I've sort of shown you an artist's depiction, but in the spirit of quantum information, maybe I'll take now a more abstract view and view a quantum network as a mathematical graph, right? So here in this graph, the nodes, again, represent the senders and the receivers, and the gray edges of the graph, so these lines and the circles, represent now quantum channels. So they would represent, for example, fiber optic links, or it could be even a free space or atmospheric link. Okay. And now the task is to distribute entanglement in this network. So here I'm showing this, this figure again that I showed at the beginning of all these applications and their different functionalities that we can do as we move up in the stages. And you'll notice that at the bottom of these are things like quantum key distribution and device-independent protocols. So these are things like teleportation and even device-independent quantum key distribution. A lot of these require, many of these, in fact, even a lot of the ones that are near the top, such as distributed quantum computing, many of these tasks are based on entanglement, right? So entanglement is this thing we talked about before. And so now the goal is to distribute entanglement in the network. In particular, the goal is to distribute entanglement between two nodes that are not directly connected to each other in the network, right? So two distant nodes, right? So how might such a protocol to distribute entanglement proceed, right? So we start with this physical graph. So when I say physical, it means that we have these connections that correspond to physical links, such as fiber optic links or free space links, right? So the first step in such a protocol would be to generate what we would call elementary links, right? So we generate entanglement between the nodes that are directly connected to each other with the physical links, right? So when I draw these red links, in red, they represent bipartite entangled states. So entangled states shared by two parties, right? And when I draw these blue bubbles, the blue bubbles represent entanglement between multiple parties. So they represent multipartite entangled states. So this is something that I didn't quite talk about earlier, but you can think of it in a similar way as the Bell states that I talked about earlier, except that now they are shared by 3 or more parties. Okay. So now once we do this initial step of generating the elementary links, now what we need to do is generate virtual links, right? So now these are the orange lines that correspond to generation of entangled states between distant nodes, right? So this is where issues of how do we actually, create this, once we have these elementary links, how do we use them to join them to create these long distance links, right? So this is where the issues of what kind of joining measurement can we do and also routing start to come into play, right? And it is these virtual links, these orange links that are one of the main tasks that we want to be able to create in a network, okay? So let me talk about one specific kind of joining measurement, which is very common, is a kind of joining measurement that we would just do along the line, right? So this is what is called entanglement swap, okay? Right, and so this protocol now is a protocol that will take this initial graph at the top of input state of elementary links and generate the virtual links at the end. Okay. So now let me talk about the joining protocols. So this is a protocol for entanglement swapping. Actually, just give me one moment.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm sorry. There was
Okay.
interruption in my office.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
No worries.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's a protocol for doing a kind of joining measurement. So this is what we call entanglement swapping. So here, the task is to distribute entanglement between Alice and Bob, who are at the ends of the network, right? And these elementary links are what are existing in between the individual nodes, right? So this kind of protocol is actually a generalization of teleportation, and it proceeds in a very similar way to teleportation. So what happens is the nodes that are in the middle, they will do some kind of measurement. In particular, they will do this kind of bell measurement that I talked about before, and they will communicate the outcomes of this measurement to Bob, who's at the end of the line. And Bob, based on these outcomes, will do a particular kind of correction operation on his qubits at the end. Okay. And this is the kind of protocol that we can use to take these elementary links that I talked about before and generate a virtual link between Alice and Bob. Okay, so even though Alice and Bob are not physically connected to each other, they are connected to each other in the sense that they share an entangled state. Okay. So now these intermediate nodes are called quantum repeaters. So they can be thought of as similar in spirit to classical amplifiers, but because of this no cloning theorem that I talked about before, and the fact that we can't just copy individual quantum states, the quantum repeater functions in a fundamentally different way in the quantum case than in the classical case, right? And so these become crucial when we want to think about creating a large-scale quantum network and, in general, a quantum internet, right? So that's the end of the second part of the talk, which is about the prospects. So what is it that we can actually do in a quantum network or in a quantum internet? And so now let me talk about some of the progress. So how much has been done so far to realize these quantum networks? And when people talk about progress, they talk about it in 3 stages. So there's a pre-quantum network and a proto-quantum network, and then finally at the end, an advanced quantum network. So in this pre-quantum network, it might be small, so let me just describe it in detail. In a pre-quantum network, what we have are end nodes, which are just classical computers, and they are connected by a classical link. So as I described before, this classical link would represent a classical internet, which is still important. And in between them, in between the 2 end nodes, we have quantum links. So we have these quantum links, but the quantum links are connected only through what's called a classical trusted repeater, right? So in this sense, because the repeater itself is a classical device, this is why we call it a pre-quantum network, even though the links, the individual dotted lines here are quantum links. Now in the proto-quantum stage, in the next stage in the middle here, this is where we start to get to quantum repeaters in the middle. And we start to really get into a true quantum network. But the end nodes, as are shown here, are still classical computers. So in that sense, we are still not in a fully fledged quantum network realm. Okay. Then at the end, we get to what's called an advanced quantum network. So here's where, in some sense, everything is quantum. So we have quantum links, we have quantum computers at the ends, and we have fully functioning quantum repeaters. And it is at this point that we would actually start to do many of the applications that I showed at the beginning of my talk about that are at sort of the top level. Like distributed quantum computing, for example, would be something that we could do once we get to this advanced stage. Okay. So here's an example of a pre-quantum network. So this is a diagram of a QKD network that was constructed in Vienna, Austria. So here I can emphasize here in particular the distance between the nodes. So here we can see 85 kilometers, 19, and so on. So it's kind of a small scale network, and it's trusted in the sense that the individual nodes in between are trusted. So if, for example, if if, for example, node 1 wanted to share a secret key with node 6, then the protocol to do this would involve sharing secret keys first between nodes 2 and nodes 4, for example, if you took that path, right? And so along that path, each of the two nodes that are in the middle would know what the key is. And so in that sense, it becomes trusted, because you would have to trust that the nodes in the middle are not being hacked, right? So that's what makes it a trusted QKD network. And similar QKD network has been constructed also in Japan. So here we also have 4 nodes, and it's a very similar idea. So it's trusted in the sense that the nodes that are in between would have knowledge of any of the secret key that is being generated between the end nodes, right? So it would have to be trusted, and so it kind of reduces the security a little bit. Okay. Now here's another example, which is a much bigger one, which is this 2,000 kilometer network between Beijing and Shanghai in China. So here as well, it's a trusted network in the sense that all of these yellow nodes in between are trusted nodes. So here they're calling them trusted relays. Okay. And as before, they need to be trusted. So any secret key that would be distributed would have to be known to the nodes that are in between. And there's another interesting thing here in this diagram that I want to point out, which is that there is a satellite here. So they also managed to connect this fiber infrastructure that they have on the ground to a satellite. And this allows them to increase the range of their network. So it allows them to distribute a link between Beijing, which is over here, and a more distant city, this Nanshan over here on the other side. And so in their paper, which I've indicated here, they actually say that their network spans 4,600 kilometers as opposed to just 2,000. So the 2,000 is just between Shanghai and Beijing, but once you have the satellite link, it becomes increased to 4,600. So I think this is quite remarkable, even though we are still at the pre-quantum network stage. I think it's still very interesting that you can do this right now. And it exists right now. So those were pre-quantum networks, but now we might wonder about the next stage. So when it comes to these proto-quantum networks, one example that we have is this particular small network that has been constructed in Delft in the Netherlands, right? So here, what they have is the ability to distribute entanglement between Alice and Bob, which are roughly 1 kilometer apart. So it's 1,280 meters. And at node C, there's a source of entanglement that would distribute the entanglement to Alice and Bob at the end. Okay. So this is one example of what is a proto-quantum network, because it actually explicitly involves distributing entanglement. Whereas these networks, these pre-quantum networks, were the sort of prepare and measure type, which I did not explicitly talk about, but is a kind that does not explicitly involve any entanglement at all. It just requires preparing a quantum state and then measuring it at the end. Okay. So this is a proto-quantum network. And so now you might be wondering about, when is this network going to get bigger? Because, with the exception of the one in China, which is a pre-quantum network, all of these networks are really pretty small, and they don't cover very large distances. And this points to many of the challenges that exist, and I'm going to talk about shortly. So one of the planned networks in the Netherlands would be a much larger network in the sense of distance, and would also contain more nodes. So this is the kind of network they have planned, and hopefully we will see it soon. So hopefully we'll see it, and it would be very exciting once this becomes sort of fully online and functioning. All right. And more recently, there was another nice demonstration of multipartite entanglement as well in a small network configuration. So this is also a very important milestone towards long distance entanglement, which is having these multipartite entangled states and also doing entanglement swapping. So these capabilities are difficult to realize in practice. And so when they are realized, even though it is over small distances, you can see 2 meters and 30 meters, even though it's a small distance, it is still a very remarkable achievement to be able to do this. So these are the types of things that have been currently done. Okay, so I started off my talk with this big promise about having a large-scale quantum internet with many nodes and on a global scale as well, right? So in this last part of my talk, I will briefly go through some of the challenges that we face in realizing a quantum network, right? So, and how to fulfill them. So one of the things I already talked about was satellites. So this was a very nice experiment that was done now a couple of years ago about distributing entanglement over 1,200 kilometers using a satellite, right? So one of the advantages of using a satellite is that it allows us to span these longer distances, so the elementary links are longer. And another nice thing is that the loss, so the noise and the loss, is a little bit lower overall than if you were just to do a ground-based link. Okay, and so this is one particular path to achieving a global scale quantum internet. And so this is where, so this particular experiment prompted myself and some of my colleagues to think about, okay, can we really do a global scale quantum internet? And what would be some of the sort of physical resource requirements of such a scheme? So this is the particular paper in NPJ-QI that was recently published by myself and my colleagues at Louisiana. And here we really had this vision, inspired by this recent experimental breakthrough, to have a global scale quantum internet. So this would be something where the satellites are distributing entanglement to ground stations, and the ground stations would then disperse this entanglement to nodes on the ground, right? And in particular, the specific kind of architecture that we looked at was this type of architecture where we have satellites that are in orbits around the Earth, and each of these satellites is distributing entanglement to ground stations, right, pairwise. Okay, so now here we can ask many different questions. So one immediate question you might have is, how many satellites do we really need in order to make this work in any reasonable way, right? And what kinds of entanglement distribution rates that we would get, right? So these are the types of questions that we investigated in this paper. And so here, I mean, I won't go through these in so much detail, but here on the left-hand side, I have a plot of the number of satellites that you need as a function of the altitude of the satellites that we pick. On the right-hand side is the rates. So what is the rate of entanglement that you can generate between two nodes in the network? And in the middle is our attempt at doing a kind of cost function analysis. So we want to know what is the sort of optimal configuration that balances both the number of satellites that we need as well as entanglement generation rate. So we might want, we certainly want a high rate of entanglement generation, but we also want to balance that with our need to lower costs. And by lowering costs, we mean keeping the number of satellites low, right? So in our paper, we define a figure of merit that we can use to investigate this trade-off between the number of satellites and the entanglement distribution rate, okay? And what we also do in that work is we investigate how good satellites would be in comparison to just purely ground-based entanglement distribution schemes, right? So here on the right-hand side, I'm showing a plot where the solid line indicates the rate that we can get using a ground-based scheme with a certain number of repeaters. So M here is the number of ground-based repeaters. And I'm also indicating now with these lines with the shapes, the rate that we found in our paper based on entanglement distribution from satellites. Right? So we can really start to see the advantages of using satellites as we increase the distance. And I should also point out that these rates with repeaters were calculated based on having sort of quantum memories that are really perfect. Perfect in the sense that they don't decohere at all, which is something that we don't currently have. So So the values that you see here for the ground-based repeater rates are really sort of ideal ones, which are maybe very far into the future. Whereas the stuff with the satellites, we can actually do right now. So that's nice. So this was a paper where we proposed one way to achieve the promise of a quantum internet, which is through satellites, right? But in general, in order to realize a quantum internet, we'll have to have some way of fighting noise, right? So this is where we get into thinking about how we're going to deal with decoherence, right? So decoherence is this thing I talked about near the beginning, where the quantum state that we initially have becomes distorted through some noise process, right? So that's what we refer to as decoherence, right? And it's manifested in a quantum network through the fact that we have imperfect quantum memories. So when I talk about a quantum memory, I just mean some kind of device that would be able to store our quantum state for some amount of time. But because the quantum memory is imperfect, as we're storing it, it becomes distorted. So it decoheres, right? So we need some way to fight that, right? And the entanglement sources that we have are also imperfect, right? So they are noisy in the sense that they are not the perfect Bell states that I showed near the beginning of my talk, but they are something that are slightly distorted away from that, right? So this will lead to imperfections in the protocols that we do. It will lead to errors, basically, right? So we need some way to fight these things, right? And people have thought for many years now about how to do this. One way to deal with the noisy entangled states is through what is called entanglement distillation. So entanglement distillation is a scheme where we take several copies of some quantum state, which is rho here that I'm showing here on the left-hand side. And through some sequence of operations, local operations, and again, classical communication, we try to distill some smaller number, say m, copies of maximally entangled states. So this is something that is also in practice difficult to achieve, but in principle can be done to increase what's called the fidelity of our entangled states, to make them closer to ideal. Okay. And here I'm just showing a particular example of that from this paper from 1996 on how to take two copies of noisy entangled states and use them to generate a single copy of another entangled state, which is closer in fidelity to the maximally entangled state, which is less distorted, less noisy. Okay. And I've zoomed in here on the left-hand side on the kind of operations that Alice and Bob would do at their ends. So this particular one is pretty simple, where they do a C0 between their two qubits, and then they measure the second one. And based on the outcomes of their measurement, they'll have a state with a particular fidelity, and they'll get that with a particular success probability as well. Okay. So this is entanglement distillation, but more generally, what we're going to require going forward is a scheme of error correction. So this is the kind of scheme that is inspired by what happens in the classical case, where we encode our data that we want to protect, that we want to keep safe, in a redundant fashion, such that if errors occur, then we can correct them. Right? So roughly speaking, it involves encoding one qubit into several qubits. So here on the left-hand side, I'm showing how one qubit can be encoded in a grid of various qubits. So here, all the circles, the open circles and the filled ones, represent qubits. And we want to be able to do this type of encoding. And this just represents one logical qubit, so as we say. Right? And we can construct quantum repeaters now based on this type of encoding. And so this is what has been done in this paper that I'm showing here on the right-hand side. So whatever state, which is psi on the left-hand side here, that wants to be sent along the chain would first be encoded, and this type of recovery operations would be applied in sequence at the individual repeater stations in order to, at the end, get the state that was intended. Right? So this is one scheme for doing error correction, and it is fault tolerant in the sense that the measurements and everything we assume to be noisy, and we still require that our communication be good. Right? So even in the presence of all of these faults, it should work. Right? And so as a final one, I'll just show this one, which is another example of a particular kind of encoding, where here on the left-hand side, the in state is something that wants to be sent to the other end, and the repeaters do almost like teleportation, but they do it in an encoded fashion. So for example, the in state is just a 1 qubit state, which is encoded into many different qubits. So I won't go into too much detail, but yeah, so this is in some sense how you would define these encoded states. But you would need several qubits in order to encode just 1 qubit, such that if there were errors along the way, then you could correct for them and maintain the state that you initially wanted, which is the state here at the top, this in state. Okay. So when we start thinking about quantum networks in a really broad sense, right, these advanced quantum networks, they would have to function in this manner. So they would have to function in using error correction. And the quantum computers that exist at the end nodes would themselves require these types of error correction schemes, which is still something that we are quite far away from achieving in practice. Right? So achieving all of these tasks, and in particular, now I am talking really about the ones that are at the top of this diagram. So these few qubit fault tolerant stage and the quantum computing stage. These schemes, in order to do them fault tolerantly, would require physical qubits and gate operations with low error rates. Right? And this is one of the challenges, one of the many challenges that we face moving forward in realizing a quantum internet in practice. So now let me just end my talk with a few directions for what you might want to do research-wise, right? So we are really right now in the realm of these near-term quantum networks. So these quantum networks that consist of a very small number of nodes, there isn't any error correction or very minimal amount of entanglement distillation. And one of the things that we want to think about is how do we make best use of the non-ideal resources that we currently have, right? How do we do this in an optimal way, right? So one of the ways to do this is to develop simulation tools. And so there's one very nice simulation tool that I can sort of advertise, which is called NetSquid. So this is a very nice simulation tool based on Python, which you can use to investigate various aspects of these near-term quantum networks, and even ones going into the future, so not just near-term ones, right? And so it's something that I would recommend as something that you can use to start playing around with different networks, different topologies, different types of control protocols, and so on. So this is the kind of thing that people look at right now in terms of research. Okay. So this is my last slide. So I hope it was informative. And here are some links to things that you can use to learn more about the quantum internet. So there's this thing called the Quantum Internet Alliance that people have that it's a group of people who are interested in the quantum internet. Similarly, there's the Quantum Internet Research Group, and you can sign up in their email list and you can sort of be aware of the kinds of things that people think about and the discussions that they have. There's also this nice QTech Academy, which has online lectures and other resources that you can use to learn. And lastly, I will talk about, just briefly mention 2 books, which I have found very helpful in learning about quantum networks. So there is this one book called Quantum Networking by Rodney Van Meter, who is one of the experts in the quantum internet, global experts. And he has written a very nice book on many of the aspects and more that I've talked about here today. And finally, there's this book of Mohsen Razavi, who also talks about quantum communication networks and how to realize them in practice. So with that, I will thank you, and I will welcome any questions that you might have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sumeet, for this wonderful talk. I really find particularly this figure about the different hierarchies and let's say difficulty levels very interesting. So there is much more to the quantum internet than only key distribution, although that's also a very important task. Okay, so actually we have a couple of questions. Krista, who is the other moderator, will lead the question and answer sessions. I will still share my screen. such that she can use it. So we, the moderators, have a few questions, and then there will be questions from the audience. So Krista, I would give you the...
Hello, and thank you very much for the presentation. And also thank you, Zoltan, for moderating everything. So I'll start with a few questions. First of all, just some general questions, and then let's go to those questions that were asked by the participants both before the presentation, also during this Zoom call. So maybe I'll start with with a quite general question, and it's a reference to one of your supervisors, Jonathan Dowling, who wrote a book about quantum internet last summer. It was a very interesting and a really exciting book in an easy language, and there the other title for this book is A Race to Build the Quantum Internet.
Right.
And then I would like to ask you, in your opinion, who is racing, who is ahead, and where is this race taking place? And also maybe a side question to this one is, how do you think about the governmental strategies for quantum technologies recently being proposed? Do they incorporate this, say, the quantum internet on a serious level?
Right. Yeah. So this is right. So this is a good question. So when we talk about who's racing, right? So I mean, what John really had in mind when he talked about this was, I mean, different countries in some sense, right? And he was really referencing the fact that China, as I already indicated, has made some really important advances already. But we also have lots of efforts now happening in the United States and also in Europe. So I talked about some of the efforts in Delft in the Netherlands. And there are also now efforts really starting to increase more in the United States. So I might say that these are the sort of competitors in some sense. And how well is quantum information incorporated into these governmental strategies? I think nowadays people are taking a lot more notice of quantum information science and quantum computing more generally. And I think they're doing a good job nowadays of incorporating these aspects into not only, strategies for just scientific education, but also actually building these things in practice. So I think a lot of money is coming in for this type of thing in the US and also elsewhere. So for example, in Europe, in China, Asia as well, in general. So I would say that the race is really about just building this thing, and I guess you can think about it in three facets. So it's like you have the United States, Europe, and China in some sense. Yeah.
Actually, I mean, to this excellent question of Krista's, may I ask an additional question after your answer is that what do you think of countries who are trying with an easier step, this, for example, implementing BB84? Isn't there approaches like that? Like maybe Japan has some idea of doing that, and perhaps also the Russian Quantum Center is doing that. Do you think that? So why are some countries like somehow jumping over that step, and why are some or the EU or the US or why are some countries doing that? Do you have some comments on that, or your personal feelings whether you can just jump over that step and it's unnecessary?
Right.
What is your thoughts on that?
Right. I'm not sure if countries such as the US are necessarily jumping over it. As you mentioned, it's a very important milestone to be able to just do QKD, for example, or BB84 in a network. So that's a very important step. And so it is something that people still think about doing. It is just that when it comes to the sort of long-term strategy, we don't want to just stop there. So we don't want to just stop at QKD and say, okay, this is good enough. But we want to try to see if we can develop these, what I call advanced quantum networks, where we really have full, like sort of proper quantum repeaters in the middle, without trusted nodes. These are the types of things that we are looking forward to. And yeah, I mean, I should not exclude people like, in Japan and also in Austria, these efforts are taking place.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is good, but in the media, you usually hear about like Bell tests and the entanglement tests.
Yeah.
That's what is in the media.
Yeah,
okay.
That ends up being more in the media because it's somehow, I don't know, maybe easier or more popular in some sense because it involves entanglement. And once you have entanglement, you can start talking about teleportation, and then that itself is a very term that maybe attracts people. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. So it's easier to talk about these things in the media, but sometimes you're right, these smaller efforts often are overlooked. And I did try to sort of talk about them here as well by talking about the effort in Vienna and Japan.
Yes, exactly.
And the Russian Quantum Center is something that is also important and should be.
Yes, I just heard a talk from them, and they were also implementing this. That's why I asked. Thanks. I give the word again to Krista.
Thanks a lot. So my second question is about your own doctoral thesis, which you have defended recently, and it's about quantum networking. So in the thesis, you have developed a very interesting framework, which is actually built on the concept of quantum decision process. So I wonder if you could explain or somehow illustrate it briefly and just show how you use it, or maybe which are the main, let's say, questions that still bother you in this decision process.
Right.
Going on.
So this is nice. So so this thing about quantum decision processes relates to one of the things I talked about near the end, which is about how to come up with optimal protocols that make the best use of like near-term resources, right? So this was one way that I used to propose doing this kind of optimization, which is through a decision process framework. So basically what you have is when you distribute entanglement, in practice, these things are probabilistic, so they don't always succeed with unit probability. So even if you just think about, for example, two elementary links and doing a measurement in the middle, you might be in a situation where this link, for example, is generated, but this one is not, right? So you would have to make a decision about whether the link that was initially generated should be kept or whether it should be discarded and reattempted. And this type of decision needs to be made with regards to like decoherence time, whether the qubit will even be useful after a certain period of time. So this is where a quantum decision process can come into play, because a decision has to be made, and the decision has to be made with respect to some kind of quantum system. So that's why this term quantum decision process comes about. And it also is relevant because it can be used to develop optimal policies or optimal protocols using reinforcement learning. So this is where this kind of machine learning framework can also come in. And I think it could be useful to think about it in this way for generating generating protocols or developing protocols. But it is something that is in general difficult to scale up. So one of the things that would bother me about this is whether or not, how useful could it really be? So could we actually use this in practice? I think there are ways to do it, but just the naive approach would not necessarily work. So there have to be some more clever usage of these ideas from decision theory in order to do this. And packages like NetSquid would allow for executing these types of ideas as well, because they already provide the simulation framework to do it.
Thanks
so I hope that was okay.
Yes, definitely. Zoltan, maybe you have something to add or ask, or should we proceed to the audience?
I hope there was some. I don't have anything to add. I really was satisfied with all these answers. They were really good. So let's ask the questions coming from the audience. I mean, we have different type of questions. Some were posted to us before your talk, and some during your talks, and then I will read one question and then Krista one. So like every event is Krista's and every other is mine. So we try to order the questions into categories. So first question is about the infrastructure and the physical layer. So do we have infrastructure to support quantum internet? I mean, it can be a broad question, what is meant by this? And a very interesting question, what is the cost? So can you say something about that? Of course, about the infrastructure, we talked a lot, but maybe here it's more like an industrial type of infrastructure.
Yes.
Which is meant.
Yeah, this is an important question. So do we have the infrastructure to support a quantum internet? So one nice thing about the quantum internet, and depending on how we implement it, is the fact that a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the fiber networks that exist already can be leveraged as part of doing some of these communication tasks. So for example, some of these pre-quantum networks that I talked about, as the quantum link, they are really just using the fiber connections that had already existed for the classical internet. It's just making use of those links with particular quantum states of light and transmitting those. So in that sense, the infrastructure is in some sense there. Now, if we start thinking about doing satellites instead, then maybe we can think that, okay, maybe we don't quite have the infrastructure to do that. And that would also increase the cost. So if you were going to go towards a satellite-based quantum internet, that would really increase the cost probably by quite a bit, because we would need, and this is the kind of thing that we addressed in our paper. This is what would be the cost of doing something like this. How many satellites would you need, and so on. So in general, some of the infrastructure that we currently have can already be exploited, but other things such as like quantum memories, actual quantum computers, these elements of the infrastructure don't really exist much beyond a laboratory environment. So I would say that in general, we are still somewhat far away from realizing a true quantum internet. So we can realize in some sense these pre-quantum or proto-quantum networks where we can do basic things like BB84 or basic entanglement distribution. But when we really want to do, like, for example, distributed quantum computing or cloud quantum computing, these applications, we are quite far away from that. And the cost of that would be quite a bit. I mean, I don't know if I can give a number, but it would be high, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think that, you probably covered a lot from the other questions that were posted here as well. But just maybe something about the fiber links and this hybrid somehow overlap between the classical and quantum networks. To what degree do you think that this development of quantum networks will actually change the infrastructure that exists currently for the classical networks, maybe?
To what extent would it change? I'm not sure. So certainly building a quantum internet will involve new pieces of infrastructure. So we would require, for example, quantum repeaters, and it might even require some new fiber links to be built as well. So that are maybe more dedicated towards just the quantum applications itself. So I think, and then that would also then, for the previous question, increase the cost. So I think it will change it in a lot of ways, especially if we also try to do a hybrid scheme with satellites. So even with satellites, I mean, there are already quite a lot of communication satellites orbiting the Earth, for example, for GPS and so on. To what extent we can leverage those is not totally clear. So even for the quantum internet, we would probably require dedicated satellite orbiting satellites. So I think it would cause, there will be quite a few changes that would come in when actually implementing a quantum internet.
So, but I mean, a lot of the effort is going towards partially this hybrid effort, right? I mean, they usually talk about trying to do some entanglement sharing or something in telecommunication wavelength and so on, like using that kind of thing. But you think that the future might be different, and you have to have dedicated quantum dedicated.
I mean, that's something that I think might happen, it might become necessary to some extent. It's hard to say. I mean, once if people really, take to the quantum internet and it starts being used on a really large scale, then it might become necessary. But it's something I cannot predict for sure. Yeah, but for now, it seems that the current infrastructure is good enough, for sure. Yeah.
I think you covered actually most of the questions here, like that you need special hardwares and so on. So, well, yes. So let me ask this question. You had this beautiful plot there, which already answers this question: what are the major milestones in the road to have a quantum internet? I mean, you talked about this, but let me then ask it. So that answers the question, but in a more personal way for you, let's say the next 10 years, what would you like to, maybe 10 years is a lot, before the end of this decade, which is a little bit less, what would you like to, so until 2029, what would you like to see being proved or being built from the quantum internet perspective, from those lines?
What I would really like to be able to see is error correction. So I would really like to be able to see a nice large-scale demonstration of error correction or even entanglement distillation. Either one of those would be very important for a quantum internet.
Yes.
So maybe entanglement distillation is a little bit easier to achieve. So I might say that maybe I would hope for that. And this would not even be something that, my expectations, I can keep them maybe not so high. And I can say that even if it's just done over, metropolitan distance or something like this, that is something that I think would still be a very big achievement.
And do you think, what would you guess in years, like a rough guess when this could be achieved?
Yeah, I think I would hope it's possible, within 5 to 10 years. I would hope so. Yeah. I'm not an experimentalist, so I cannot say with too much certainty because, it's challenging and, I don't always know exactly what is going on, but I would hope and expect that, within 5 to 10 years, we will have something along the lines of what I said. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So do you think, Krista, you want to ask some of those? Or?
Well, I think maybe, yeah, but just one question I'll put together about this scaling constraints and then where are the real advantages? And do you think that first, that only with large scale networks, it's possible to see the real advantage of the quantum internet? Or do you think that also a combination of small networks can still, let's say, bring the big benefits somehow promised by the applications?
Right. So yeah, when we talk about an advantage, it depends on what application we are talking about. So I think that to me, even being able to do QKD or BB84 between two nodes, in some sense demonstrates advantage. In the sense that that already indicates that we can do something that we can't really do classically, which is share secret key in this kind of information theoretically secure way. Although there are issues in the actual implementations itself, the fact that we can actually do this already points to some kind of advantage, and it does not have to be even over a very large distance. And then the next thing would be to do something like teleportation, which is also something that has been demonstrated in a way by distributing entanglement, right? So that also is a demonstration of advantage. Now it might not be a sort of fancy, large scale, many different nodes, but to me that already demonstrates advantage. It does not have to be at a really large distance, in my opinion, for it to demonstrate advantage. But of course, as we move forward, we would want to see those larger distances. But they on their own are not required in order to say that quantum is advantageous. I think that part is already clear.
Thanks. This was, I think, a clear answer. So actually, I mean, you touched this, but let me then, since this question is so explicit from Thomas Ordo, let me actually pose this question in a little bit different way. So about quantum satellites and let's say optical cable quantum communication. So, I mean, you touched upon the cost, and obviously the cost of quantum satellites should be very, very high. But let me ask you, so what do you think will, if there would be such a quantum internet? I mean, this is of course just a little bit forecasting, and which we might not know, but of course the costs are going down. Like you can have these microsatellites and so on,
Yes.
microcube. What do you think will be still dominant? Do you think the optical cable part of the quantum communication will be the dominant one, or the satellite one? I mean, obviously you touched upon this question and said it should be a combination, but
Yeah.
do you have some feeling about this, or it really should be a synergy between those two?
Yeah, I really think that there will still be some synergy between them. So we might imagine a future, I'm not sure about, I think it is still a big if that whether whether or not we'll have satellites being very common. But if we ever do have satellites, then I still think that we will need optical cables to send qubits at local levels. So we might imagine that the satellites can be used to distribute entanglement to particular hubs around the Earth, right? And then once those hubs are established, then they could, within their metropolitan area, distribute entanglement through over smaller distances using ground-based, optical cables. That to me seems like a hybrid approach that would work, and would offer a good trade-off between number of satellites and cost and so on. Yeah.
Thanks. I mean, I think that was a very clear answer to this. So, Krista, do you want to ask something? I mean, we have touched a lot of questions about timing and future. Do you think we can skip those?
Yes, it's solid. Maybe so just, there were 2 questions about geography of the future internet and how actually some regions where perhaps the ecosystem is not present yet could benefit from other regions having it. So in the region there is Middle East and Northern Africa. So do you have any ideas about that?
So what exactly is, can you ask the question again? So
yes.
Sorry, it says, how can communities in the MENA region leverage other quantum ecosystems in the USA, in the EU, to push the industries towards making use of the quantum technologies use cases?
Right. Okay. So if I understand correctly, I think, okay. Yeah, so I'm not sure if this will answer the question exactly, but one of the nice things, for example, is the fact that we have this QWorld to begin with. So it allows us to, people in these regions to interact with people who are, in North America or in the EU. And nowadays as well, when it comes to quantum computing, a lot of these quantum computing companies are, providing their services over the cloud. So this is allowing people in other regions which might not have this level of, technology or infrastructure to gain access to, real quantum systems. So I think these companies could certainly do more, and I think at some level they do have it as part of their mission statement to really, or they should have it as part of their mission statement to really try to globalize or to broaden the scope of their audience and to try to make their devices available to as many people as possible. Yeah, I do think that's very important. And there's a lot of talent in these regions as well. So as we start to reach out to them more, it can only be helpful. So it can only help to increase knowledge of quantum information and quantum science, and bringing more people gives different perspectives, and it can help to advance our cause. Yeah.
I absolutely agree about this. So the next question is somehow particular, of course. I mean, it was related to some of the things he said. So in what ways do you think Singapore will profit from the fact that they don't need quantum repeaters? I guess it is about, in more general terms, you can say about like metropolitan areas versus non-metropolitan areas. Do you have some comments on this? Do you think it will be, for example, mostly quantum internet will be in metropolitan areas, or what is your projection?
Right.
Say?
It might be possible that, first of all, I'm not sure if it is clear that Singapore would never need quantum repeaters. I think that, so I still think you would need quantum repeaters. It depends on your application. So already we are seeing that if you just want to do QKD in some sense with trusted nodes, right? With trusted nodes, you don't need a quantum repeater. And this has already been demonstrated at metropolitan levels. But if you wanted to do QKD at high rates, even at a metropolitan level, which is like without trusted nodes, then you would need quantum repeaters, even at metropolitan scales, and even for a smaller country or city country like Singapore, you would still need it.
Okay, so that's the answer. So it won't benefit too much because you will still need it.
You still need it, I think.
Yeah.
I believe you would still need it, yeah.
So yeah, there was, I think this question was from the audience, like the first question, Krista, right? This how to approach this topic with the MSc degree in mathematics, or?
Yes, but that was also already asked before. So I think it's just one of one question that forms a block about career and study. Study choices. That's how to approach the topic from a different backgrounds, and maybe also what would your suggestions be for picking research or study themes? So
right. So nowadays, I mean, quantum information science is a very kind of broad area now, very interdisciplinary, with lots of different fields coming into it. So there are a lot of different ways to approach quantum information science. Typically, most people nowadays still come from a physics background, but nowadays with a mathematics background, you can still do a lot. So you can still do lots of theoretical work in quantum information with a master's degree in mathematics. So you can do things like quantum algorithms, even network science, right? Network science people typically are either from computer science or mathematics. And quantum information itself is quite mathematical. So if you're able to take courses in quantum information, either at your institution or online, there are lots of online resources nowadays available, then someone with a background in mathematics would be perfect in some sense, depending on what they're interested in. So if you're interested in theoretical work, then a background in mathematics will be very good. If you want to do experiments, then you would need more of a physics background. But it's something that, it depends on what you want to do. So if you want to do theoretical work, then a background in mathematics will be sufficient. Because most of the information theoretic stuff that you do, you don't necessarily need to always know about the physics of what's going on. So as long as you know the mathematics, then you can already make progress. So I hope that answers the question.
There are a couple of few questions about the career. So would you select some of them, Krista, or?
Yes, I don't know if we have the time for all of them, but the first one is very easy one. So which one, in your opinion, is the best use case for the quantum internet?
The best use case. Okay, so
the Zoom questions. Yeah.
Right. So so this will be depending on what stage we are at. So I think one of the nicest use cases of the quantum internet, that's a good one. So I think, there are many use cases. So some of the ones that I discussed really talk mostly about these point-to-point things like teleportation or secret key distribution and so on. These might be the best use cases for the near term. But when we start getting into sort of more into the future, then we can start getting into more of these multi-party protocols like secret sharing and something called Byzantine agreement and all these other more interesting things that require full-fledged quantum computers to do, like distributed quantum computing, cloud computing, all of these things. These are the types of things that would be the best use case in some sense, because suppose you had several small quantum computers around the world, you could network them, and using those quantum computers, you might be able to do things like simulate quantum systems, right? So this is one of the things that is believed to be one of the best applications for quantum computers, which is simulating quantum systems itself. It is the original idea that Feynman, when he thought of quantum computers, he had in mind. So the best use case would depend on the timeline. So in the near term, I would say it's more about teleportation, doing private communication. In the future, the best use cases are essentially the use cases for quantum computing itself, but doing it in a distributed network.
Thanks a lot. Would you still pick one, Krista, or should I pick one? I mean, I can ask this question, although I think the answer might be clear here. Since quantum discord is a more robust correlation measure, I guess, what he wants to, can we use that for the quantum internet? I guess instead of entanglement.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not fully familiar with Discord and its relation to entanglement.
Yeah, I mean, in some way, a separable state can have non-zero discord as well, right?
Right.
So this means that you cannot do, for example, this Bell test type of thing. So
right. Yeah.
You cannot. Yeah, that's it's more like that. There are entangled states with which you cannot do it. Also, like the
yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like
yeah.
the bound entangled state.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
right.
I would say perhaps Krista, you pick one, and then I have one final. I pick one final one.
Yes, I think I definitely must mention a question which I almost skipped, and that was about if you could give your suggestions for papers. And that's just the question, just a bit below. It says, for creating a network faster, other papers that have been worked on creating GHZ-based measurements instead of Bell measurements in practical.
This one.
So, yeah, and it's a question that's been twice, so it's something that really waits for your opinion.
Yes, so there are papers that talk about doing GHZ-based measurements. Yes, I can provide those. I don't have them sort of on hand, but if there are people looking for specific papers, then yes, I can look and provide those. If there are indeed papers that do this, and yeah, I mean, there are these books that I mentioned at the end. They also talk about some of this, but if there's interest, I can look into it and provide these papers. Maybe in the Slack channel at some point, I can do that if that is okay.
Thank you very much, and let me ask a final question, which let me call you back, because this touches upon our organization QWorld. Can you recommend some research group to establish contacts and work together on quantum internet and quantum communications?
Oh, research. What do you mean by research groups?
Well, well, yeah, it could mean, okay, maybe I was thinking of these study groups more, so maybe it meant the research groups. So perhaps, unfortunately, this was questions not posed necessarily by the audience here, but the previous questions. So maybe Aliciades is here, I don't know. Yeah, if not, well, then I guess it's just which are the, let me, since it was in this career path, I would reformulate then the question in that, how do you think it would be easiest to, if somebody wants to work on this in this field, to get in touch with research, let's say, or what would you recommend to go to look for a university in his or her university, a professor, or try to look around in the world and apply to specific places.
Right.
Or you can maybe use our network, this QWorld network, or I don't know what is opinion about this.
Right. Yeah. So this is So if you're interested in working in quantum networks, quantum internet, or even quantum information science in general, one of the things I would recommend is for you at your institution to talk to the professors who are in your department and ask them about opportunities if they exist. This QWorld initiative has been set up in part to allow for people to get in touch with each other. So I would hope that this would be useful as well. So you ask people who are part of this. You can ask me, for example, which you are doing already. So ask the professors who are at your institution. If you're interested in doing undergraduate or graduate studies, then there are good places in Europe to work on quantum internet. For example, there's Delft. And they also have lots of online resources, some of which I mentioned before. If you're looking for something in North America, there are many places in the United States. So recently, there's been set up this thing called the Center for Quantum Networks. So that's a recent thing that has just been established just last year. So this is a collection of different institutions and universities that are working together to build quantum networks in the US and just do fundamental research. There's also in Canada, the Institute for Quantum Computing, which does very nice work in quantum networks. Some of the people do work in quantum networks. So yeah, I mean, I would say if you're interested, reach out to people who you're interested in working with, get research experience. So hopefully if there's someone in your department, if you're an undergrad or even doing masters, hopefully there's someone in your department who does research so that you can join a research project. It does not have to be directly related to what you're working on, but if it's something that excites you, then you should work on it. And this will help look good on your application to graduate school. And it will show that you like to do research and that you're enthusiastic and that you're motivated. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. That I think was a really useful answer. And just to add that within Q Research, where Krista and also you are taking part, we are going to organize this internship program called QIntern, and if somebody is interested, then she or he can apply to different mentors. We will have those announcements later on around May.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot.
I mean, this QWorld thing is really great. I mean, even I don't fully know everything that's going on because there's so much. So it's very good to mention these things about internships and so on. I mean, it's a really good initiative, and I'm very glad this exists.
We are very happy to have you here within our initiative, Sumeet. And thank you very much for this great talk. So I put this applause sign on my.
Right.
It was a great talk, and thank you very much. I mean, we're a little bit over time, but I think everybody enjoyed it. Thank you.
Right. Thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a great experience. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.